Welcome, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. Thank you for joining us for today's event. My name is Safa Lukili. I'm the events director of the Oxford Climate Society and a master's student in environmental change and management here at Oxford. Our society is part of the university, and we aim to develop the next generation of informed climate leaders. In addition to our speaker events, we run educational programs, including our School of Climate Change, which is currently teaching over 1,400 students. We also run the world's largest student-led climate journal, The Anthroposphere, and are currently working with the university to incorporate climate into the curriculum. Today's event will discuss China's growing environmentalism, this prospect for sustainable development in the country, and its newly declared net zero policy. In September 2020, President Xi Jinping announced that China would strive to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, while further details on the implementation of such a target remain to be released. This announcement brings us much closer to achieving the Paris Agreement's goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. And this new policy is actually embedded in China's new sustainable development strategy and exemplify the party's newly adopted political philosophy of the ecological civilization. From the promotion of nuclear and renewable energies, to the development of advanced environmental legislation, to the expansion of protected areas and afforestation, China's leadership has demonstrated an increasing concern for environmental protection, climate mitigation and adaptation since the early 2010s. However, this ideological positioning, which allowed for such quick rollout of laws and plans hides an array of social and political implications and complexities in China and abroad. Within China, this state-led environmentalism has often taken the shape of a top-down, exclusive, and maybe coercive endeavor for populations in less developed regions of the country. And abroad, there has been growing concerns about the sustainability and environmental perspectives or view of the Belt and Road Initiative. And so to discuss this quite complex situation and often paradoxical one, I am delighted to welcome Professor Judith Shapiro and Mr. Ma Jun. So Professor Shapiro is the director of the Masters in Natural Resources and Sustainable Development for the School of International Service at American University in Washington, D.C., USA. Her research focuses on global environmental politics and policy, the environmental politics of Asia, Chinese politics, and the Mao. She is also the author of China Goes Green, Coercive Environmentalism for a Troubled Planet, published in 2020, along with co-author Li Yifei. Ma Jun is the director of the Beijing-based NGO, the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs, and a well-known and respected leader in Chinese environmental community. In 2016, he launched the very unique China air and water pollution databases that have grown since to provide public access to key pollution data in the country and beyond. And prior to this, Mr. Ma was an investigative journalist with the South China Morning Post. And so to start off the event, I'll hand over to Dr. Shapiro to start. Please. You're muted.
I know. I want to start just by saying that it's an incredible honor to be invited by Oxford Climate Society, but also particularly to share this panel with Ma Jun, who is really one of the key environmental heroes of our time. So he may be modest when he speaks, but don't let that fool you. He's really a great, great figure. So I'm going to go first because I'm going to try to frame things a bit. And I'm going to give a somewhat general presentation about how bad things are for people domestically, and what some of the tools that the government is using are, with their pluses and minuses. So the talk doesn't focus on climate specifically, but of course it has implications for climate. So let me start sharing my screen. Okay, yeah, so here we are today. So as Safa mentioned, I do have a new book called China Goes Green, Coercive Environmentalism for a Troubled Planet. And I'm going to talk today about some of the insights from that book. My co-author, Ife Li, and I wanted to investigate exactly what this means. This is ecological civilization that the world seems to be so excited about. So here, just to establish my credentials, I hope you can recognize that this is me. So I've been in and out of China since 1977. And here I'm trying to become more integrated into Chinese society, because in those days there were like no foreigners. And if they knew you were a foreigner, forget it, they would mob you. So, you know, this is the kind of rhetoric that we're seeing these days. You know, clear waters and green mountains are gold mountains and silver mountains. You know, Xi Jinping is just seeing a green future for China. You know, this again, an example of the kind of rhetoric we're hearing, visions of green development, green, low carbon, circular, sustainable. You know, it sounds much greener than, you know, anything that's coming out of certainly the US, although Biden is doing some pretty amazing things recently. So just to establish, you know, let's not think that all of a sudden everything is wonderful. And I'm just going to show you a series of images to remind you. This one, for example, we always think about Beijing and air pollution, but this is Gansu, right? The far western part of the country. A lot of coal there. Yeah, some people doing their best to practice Tai Chi Chuan in the air pollution. This is pre-COVID. If you can see, that's Tiananmen Square in the background, and they're trying to do a little kite flying, a traditional Chinese art. Many, many industrial accidents. This is a very famous image. Toxic pollution. You can see here in the background also the role of the military in mitigating some of these industrial accidents. The PLA is often on the front lines when something like this happens. This very famous image also, Shanghai is considered to be, I don't know, the Paris of China. And in 2014, all these pigs were dumped into the waterways, contaminating the water, the drinking water of Shanghai. Lots of PX, or petrochemical complex plant explosions, a very sort of controversial activity. This one in 2015. This is another industrial accident. It wasn't PX, it was some chemicals that were illegally stored in Tianjin, which is right near Beijing, one of the great cities of China. So the people are pretty upset. Okay, so that's a baseline. The Chinese people are really tired of this. And as they become wealthy and, you know, enter the middle class, they're less and less tolerant. So there is a special role that journalists play in helping to mobilize public opinion. This is another famous hero, Liu Jianqiang. Like Ma Jun, really, really famous, but unlike Ma Jun, he's been basically exiled to the United States. But he was able to stop the building of a dam on the Tiger Leaping Gorge. Here's another famous journalist, Chai Jing. She made a kind of TED Talk documentary called Under the Dome, which we think that maybe 1/5 of all the Chinese people saw it before the censors came in and basically wiped it away from the internet. And here's a couple clips from that film. It's a very anthropocentric film. It's not about pandas or, you know, cranes. It's about children and how, you know, children have never seen the blue sky, never seen the clouds. Yeah. And her motivation was that her fetus, her unborn child, had developed a tumor, and she attributed that to the pollution in the air. So she said this, sort of a call to arms. And in fact, she told everybody to download some of the apps that Ma Jun's organization has created. And my understanding from my former students who work with Ma Jun, that some of their servers were crashing at that moment because everybody was downloading the apps that would tell them how bad is the air, how bad is the water, how can I report this, how can I report that. So, the people are mobilizing. There's a lot of internet censorship, but they can't censor taking a walk. I mean, if you said, let's go for a protest, they would censor that. But if you're all going for a walk at the same time, yeah. So some themes of contemporary ENGO life, unlike our understanding of civil society in the West, Chinese civil society must work with selected government agencies in order to survive. So they have to be accommodative and flexible in their relationship with the government. But it's not a fixed thing. Sometimes they'll cooperate with the government, sometimes they'll oppose the government, depending on the situation. And then this, they appreciate transparency. So most Chinese ENGOs have to have tea on a regular basis with members of the Public Security Bureau to tell them what their plans are for the coming year or what they're up to or what this campaign is. So as long as they're very disclosing, then they may be allowed to survive. But it's a very tricky kind of a path to walk. So here's just, this is the table of contents of the new book. And I want to talk just very briefly about some of the tools that the government is using that are fairly coercive to implement the environmental goals. So just briefly, the structure of the book is we focus on the developed eastern part of the country, the less developed western part of the country, the Belt and Road, and even what China is doing to manipulate outer space and the global atmosphere. So in terms of crackdowns and targets, the problem with this kind of tool is that it can come all of a sudden. This is funny because, so all of a sudden they'll say, okay, here's some great leader like Obama is coming to town, or we're having the Olympics, or there's an APEC meeting. And so they shut down all the factories and they make a blue sky. So they have a blue sky parade, a blue sky G20 meeting. And this is supposed to be a decoration, but this is a funny picture just because it reminds everybody that it's not a blue sky day anymore, right? But anyway, so there'll be this crackdown and there'll be a lot of pain, if you will, some economic pain for the factories, or ordinary people aren't allowed to drive their car somewhere. And they'll sometimes feel like, how come the government cares more about our face, our reputation in the world, than it does about us, ordinary people. One more example of the crackdown. Well, let me keep going. This is the recycling crackdown that they've implemented very quickly in Shanghai, and they didn't explain it very well. And nowadays they're even implementing some social credit score readings so that if you don't recycle properly, it'll hurt your social credit score. And if you do, it'll help your social credit score. And of course, what they've done there with the recycling is they've basically wiped out this informal industry of migrant workers who used to come into the cities and collect the recyclables and sort them. And so all of those people are wiped out, and the government is kind of subsumed that economy into their own recycling plans. So this kind of target setting, I'm not going to read this to you, but you can see from the point of view of a low-level official, when you're going to be promoted or given bonuses based on your ability to achieve these goals, you can see that these are very, very quantitative, very mechanical. And, if you have to go for, I don't know, a forest cover rate of 23.04%, how do you do that? And so always the officials are looking upwards for judgment. They're not getting what's called supervision from below in the classic words of the Chinese. It's an ideal of the Communist Party. So this one-size-fits-all policymaking now moving towards the western part of the country with green grabbing and ecological migration. So green grabbing, I was just saying, dam building is very, very controversial in China. It becomes really hard for local people to resist a dam if the hydropower is being subsumed into an overall commitment by the government to achieve a certain amount of renewable energy within a certain time frame and move away from fossil fuels, right? So hydropower is considered to be a renewable, and if you know, and yet it's very risky. It's got a lot of human rights implications. A lot of these dams are being built in very earthquake-prone areas. Yeah, so we're calling that green grabbing. It's kind of a spin-off of land grabbing, right? And then ecological migration, here's a picture. You know, the Chinese state, those of you who know James Scott's work, you know, the Chinese state has been trying to pacify the borders for centuries, if not millennia. States don't like nomads, in the words of James Scott. And so now finally the Chinese state has been able to use a cloak of green justifications to force nomads to give up their nomadic lifestyle and move into these towns and cities. These are some former nomads in the name of ecological protection, because they're blaming the sharp-hooved sheep and goats for tearing up the grasslands. So they're going to preserve the grasslands and force the nomads to give up their lifestyles so that the state can keep track of them. So this is a kind of very risky situation. Okay, so moving right along, because I know we have a lot to hear about from others. This is a wild thing that they're doing. So on the Tibetan Plateau, it's not just a short-term blue sky day. They're implementing these machines that shoot silver iodide into the atmosphere, which binds apparently with particles and makes it rain. And there are already 500 of these, and they're going to build tens of thousands of them, so that when the monsoons come up from India, they're going to shoot these particles in the air, make it rain. And that's because the Chinese government, unlike the Chinese people, who are much more worried about air pollution, water pollution, public health issues, the Chinese government is very concerned about the impacts of climate change, in that all these melting glaciers are going to cause short-term flooding, and then in the longer term, dropping aquifers. So a big city like Beijing is already incredibly water scarce. And we could have kind of climate refugees from Beijing displace people all over North China because there isn't enough water. So this is an effort to manipulate the weather. You know, also just another reason that the Chinese government is so concerned about climate change is that sea level rise is having a tremendous impact in Shanghai, Guangzhou, Tianjin. Some of these major coastal cities are already feeling a lot of impacts from climate. So when we talk, I'm sure we will in the discussion, about these 2060 climate commitments, we should think not only about, you know, what is China trying to do with respect to getting sort of face and reputation on the global scene and living up to its global commitments and all of these sorts of things, but also what would the government be doing anyway, because they're worried enough about climate change. Okay, so just moving abroad, you know, here we have the Belt and Road. This is some propaganda, happy miners in Africa, happy miners from China. But of course, the reality on the ground is much more tense. In general, Chinese investors are not used to consulting with communities, and there's quite a lot of pushback at the local level, whether in Africa, Latin America. And the Belt and Road, of course, is now everything, right? It used to be, I think I have a map here, maybe this was the old Belt and Road image, but now the Belt and Road includes, you know, Italy and Greenland and the Polar Belt and Road and a Space Belt and Road and Latin America, and you know, there's a dairy Belt and Road to New Zealand. And so it's pretty much everything that the Chinese are doing overseas. And on the one hand, it can be very welcomed, but on the other hand, it's kind of fraught. And if we think overall about the global impacts of China's rise, you know, I could divide it simply into three areas. First being the impact on global biodiversity, which is something I care about personally very, very much. A lot of these animals are ingredients in traditional Chinese medicine. And in the past, most Chinese couldn't afford it. And there wasn't a Chinese presence, you know, say in Kenya, where there are, you know, a lot of elephant poaching is going on. But now, you know, many of this Chinese market is kind of linking together with organized crime in many parts of the world, and putting a huge impact on all of these species. Generally speaking, when we look at, capitalism theory, capitalism always needs to look for new markets and to seek new sources of raw materials. And a lot of these raw materials in the part 2 here are China's running out at home. There's always been anxiety about grain, but they've bought the anchovy fisheries outside of Peru, and they're built fossil fuel projects throughout the world and extracting minerals, and all of this transforms landscapes and livelihoods, and all the transport contributes to climate change. And finally, just in general, the Belt and Road Initiative is focused on these big infrastructure projects: ports, dams, pipelines, roads and railroads, power plants. And there's a lot of discussion of the coal-fired power plants and the climate impacts of the Belt and Road Initiative, and less attention is being given to the way these big transportation sort of globalization facilitating infrastructure projects fragment landscapes and really harm biodiversity. So that's a really important issue as well. Okay, almost done here. So I don't know what my time is. I probably blab on and on. So, another sort of way that some coercive environmentalism can be wielded for good or for bad, right? So I would say for good. China, as you probably know, has banned the import of waste from outside starting in January 1st of this year. And that helps us it really forces the consumers of this kind of hazardous waste to deal with it at home. So there should be more and more take back regulations. So if you manufacture something hazardous, you should be obligated to figure out how you're going to deal with it. And ideally, that would put pressure on manufacturers to stop using such hazardous materials to begin with. So this is, of course, a really, really famous image of a child in Guiyu who's being forced to live in this kind of incredibly hazardous environment. So the question that we had in the book is, is this a kind of environmentalism that uses authoritarian means to achieve it? Or ultimately, is what we're seeing an authoritarianism that is using environmental justifications to achieve state goals? And we submit in this book that it's more the second than the first. Yeah, so this is one idea, and that's another idea. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Professor Shapiro. Now I'll hand over to Majin.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Safa, for having me. I want to join Dr. Shapiro by saying that it's such an honor to be invited by the Oxford Climate Society to join this this online event, and it's also a great honor to follow the leading expert, the authority on the issue, Dr. Shapiro, and it's such a relief to follow Dr. Shapiro, because she has even more slides than me. I try to go quick, and yeah, I want to talk about Dr. Shapiro has framed it very well, that China, the last 40 years, have gone through massive industrialization and urbanization, and the environment paid a heavy price. And behind the smog that Dr. Shapiro has presented, the fact is that China simply burns half of the world's coal, and there has been a vast increase of coal consumption since 2000. Just 12 years of time, our coal consumption tripled, and this have local, but also regional and even global impact as the largest current carbon emitter. And China has been trying to fight against local pollution, and I myself got into this, started my paying attention in mid 1990s, and put it into a book, China's Water Crisis, and then in the year 2000 and 2005, after coming back from Yale after my fellowship program, I decided that it's it's time to build a database, environmental database, because if people, I trust that that the environmental issues cannot be resolved through simply a top-down government action, but extensive participation from the stakeholders need to be empowered by the access to information. So we built the Blue Map database, and during all these years have developed index to assess the performance of 120 cities. And through all these efforts, we have witnessed the expansion of China's environmental transparency. And today, it was very different. In the first year, we could manage to compile only 2,000 records of violations. And today, that number have grown quickly, approaching 2 million. And every day we're tracking 5,000 sources, and managed to collect 3 million emission data every day. Because China have launched the world's first real-time disclosure of online monitoring of all the major emitters. Every hour or every 2 hours, they need to disclose. And with all this, we put it into a cell phone app called the Blue Map, and try to compile all this air quality, water, soil, and coastal sea, and also put more than 3 million emitters on the digital map, and try to color code them according to their level of pollution. And tens of thousands of micro reports have been filed against those red dot companies, and thousands of them in response, have made openly address their violations. Among them, actually, most of them are state-owned enterprises because they are the largest air emitters. And through all these multi-stakeholder efforts, we have seen a continued improvement of air quality since 2013. We have just through this map, we can see that 169, now 68 cities, the annual average of PM 2.5 dropped from nearly 60 to nearly 40 in just from 2015 to 2020. And in Beijing, that number have also dropped from nearly 90 to 38 last year, and quite a dramatic declining. Having said that, last December, you can see our map, color-coded map. You can see how a major part of the densely populated regions in China are still suffering from air pollution. And through this, we can also see, China's carbon emission have actually been brought, the vast increase, the very fast increase have been brought to a sudden halt, along with the fighting of the local pollution. But in the meantime, the last 2-3 years, due to all this slowing down of the economy, the trade war, and the hit of the pandemic, I think China, many regions, some regions try to go back to the old way, and we started seeing the energy-intensive industries picking up, and really that has driving up the carbon emission again. So this is the backdrop for this, in some way, unexpected pledge to be made by President Xi. I think, in some way, it may have a geopolitical considerations, but on the other hand, it is a ambitious target because some of the carbon neutrality pathways are still not very clear. European Union have been trying to enhancing its own contribution, and as Dr. Shapiro said, it's very exciting to see the new President Biden, announced going back to Paris and carbon also going zero carbon by 2050. And China's commitment will vastly enhance the global, as Safa said, enhance the global chance, the chance to achieve the climate target. And but in the meantime, China will have to hasten the process much faster than some of the other countries. So this is a 40-year-long pledge. We believe that it's vitally important to try to divide them into milestones and then try to distribute them to regions, provinces, and cities. So we have been working on a low carbon map since last year, and so we launched that, and people can access all this data on provincial and city level emission. And we also launched with our partners a carbon peak index just to try to assess the trending of different cities, and developed a blue carbon peak index. We can see some cities are leading, are pioneering, but unfortunately there are still too many of them lagging behind. So we have to remind them that they need to take action. And of course, the other way to do this is to distribute them to industries and businesses. They are the major emitters in China, and so we trust that market-based approach is very, very important, especially at this moment. But simply top-down methodology may not work because we are again facing pressing confrontation, between the development versus environmental protection. And so our green supply chain work started from the IT industry. We witnessed pollution, but in the meantime, vast corrective actions taken. And then the textile industry, some of the dirtiest rivers caused by all this 2.5 billion tons of textile wastewater. But one after another, the major brands sourcing from China started using our data to, before they signed contract, they started comparing their list with our list, not just global brands, but local brands like Huawei, TCL, Li Ning, and of course, there's also embedded carbon exported from China. And if we want to go carbon neutrality, then the scope 3, the supply chain part, have to be integrated. With so much data, even the best companies cannot follow them. So we developed a big data and solutions based on AI technology. And I'm glad to see many of them started pushing for their supply chain, taking their supply chain to the data chain. And also, beside the green supply chain, green finance is another market too that can have a vast impact. But data access is also vital. So based on the big data we developed a dynamic environmental credit assessment tool. And now at this moment, during the pandemic, we're we're helping the banks to run through 70,000 companies who want to borrow money. And some of them started disclosing, hundreds of them started disclosing their information, including the carbon emission. And finally, I want to say the green transition also must start from measurement and disclosure. With that in mind, we launched the global brand map, and just to have people help the brands benchmark each other by showcase how much they want to go green, and of course developed an index on climate, supply chain climate index. We have seen many multinational brands, but unfortunately local brands, only 1% of them can manage their supply chain carbon. And so they lag far behind, but the local companies having a huge carbon footprint. So we started engaging some of the largest ones like the real estate and construction, and hoping to help them to go green. And of course, we need to empower them by helping them first. All this orange dots means those major emitters which haven't really disclosed. So we developed a accounting platform. They can easily get all this data if they can map out their carbon footprint. And some of the leading brands like Dell, Foxconn, and some of the local brands started driving their suppliers to measuring and disclosing. And the 14th five-year plan, we hope to see China's environmental movement getting double engines. Before, it's just a pollution control, but from now on, it will be pollution control along with carbon emission reduction. So raising toward carbon picking by 2030, and then 2060 carbon neutrality. Thank you again for your attention. I'm happy to have further discussions with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating to see all the work that you've been doing with the IPE, with multinationals, with banks, and to start to see such a strong civil society and kind of a movement from multi-stakeholders. It's really, really interesting and exciting. To start, I'll just present you some questions from myself, and then I'll come to the questions from the audience. So please, if you have any, put them in the chat on YouTube, and I'll present them to the speakers. So my first question, I think when we see your presentations, it seemed quite clear that there's been like a kind of a long process of working for pollution alleviation, and that there's a growing concern for environmental policies in China. But for people from outside of China, when they heard about, China announced its net zero policy by 2060, it came as a surprise, especially because China had been such a kind of refractory member in the Copenhagen summit, and then didn't present any net zero policy in Paris, and then again was quite antagonized others in Madrid in 2019. It came as a surprise. Could you please maybe elucidate what kind of domestic but also international events led to this political shift? Maybe we can start with Professor Shapiro.
Yeah, so certainly, yeah, from the Copenhagen meeting, when China was considered to be like the spoiler in the room, to now China's kind of the leader, I think there's a bunch of reasons. One reason is that the US has really pulled back, and so there's a big power vacuum, if you will. And so this is an area where China can gain sort of global face. Really, I mean, China's being criticized for human rights abuses and what's going on in Xinjiang and Tibet. And sort of belligerence in the South China Sea and all of these things. But here, something where, basically the world can admire China. And the other thing is that China, it's hard to generalize China, but let's say the Communist Party of China recognizes that they have become a wealthy country. For a long time, they were playing this kind of developing country card. And now they realize they're one of the world's biggest economies and they're doing really well compared to a lot of places. So they're, stepping up in terms of their responsibility. And then the third thing I think I've already mentioned in my talk is that China was going to do something anyway because of the concerns about the impacts of climate change domestically, sea level rise, glacier melt, extreme weather events, water shortages, and so on and so forth. So, I think all of these reasons can help us to understand the shift. Yeah, maybe Majun has something to add.
Yeah, please go ahead, Martin.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Shapiro has given a rather comprehensive, response to that, and I would add that in China, the reason for this change to happen, from Copenhagen, we did feel the international pressure, not just coming from the developed countries, but for the first time from the developing countries who kind of require, China to take more action. But it was very hard to make that decision until, I think that the smog issue in China has really been a good, a real game changer, because when hundreds of millions, when millions upon millions made their voice heard on the social media and demanding for the data, for clean air, and I think the government eventually lent a ear to that demand and changed the ambient air quality standards, and for the first time decided to measure and disclose PM 2.5, the fine particles that cause all this smog. And but it was obviously not sufficient just to let people know which day to put on face mask or lock their children indoor. People want solutions, and the government came up with a 10-point action plan, spending 1.5 trillion, to try to deal with the air pollution. If we try to curb air pollution, we need to tackle the burning of the coal. We need to tackle this restructuring of the industry, the transportation, structure. So anyway, we have to deal with that, and there's a huge co-benefit that can be reaped, on the climate side. So this, I think, have helped to help China to make that political decision to go, with climate action, and it paved the way for the Xi-Obama deal, and this, have led to the signing of the Paris Agreement, and the new commitment. I think it's is based on, I think, not on very detailed calculation about which year that we can achieve that, but it's also very much a political decision. And as Dr. Shapiro said, there are geopolitical reasons. There might be that, but on the other hand, this decision is also vital to the globe. China, 2018, our emission is already above 10 billion and 10 billion tons, and now it's well above 30% of the global total. If China wouldn't take an action, picking is not enough, because you can continue to drive up the emission until you pick. So we have to put it with a very tough carbon neutrality target to actually make it meaningful. So I'm glad to see this pledge made, and now it's up to all of us to try to consolidate that, to make sure that we can not just pick by before 2030, and 30. We hope to peak much earlier and try to bend the curve much faster.
Fantastic. To be honest, as a non-American and non-Chinese, it was such a relief earlier where we saw Joe Biden taking the presidency in the US and China changing its climate policy. Such a kind of hope for the future. I just had a question on what you were saying earlier, Professor Shapiro. So you were saying that the Chinese government was very much concerned about water scarcity and the impact of climate change, and them injecting silver iodide particle in the clouds to kind of face this issue. Do you think that this concern of the Chinese Communist Party will outweigh the political and economic gain that they can get by financing fossil fuel projects along the Belt and Road Initiative? Or do you think that we're still far from that?
Yeah, those are two different kinds of questions. I thought you were going with a point that I wanted to make anyway, which is that there is a tendency towards a very technocratic approach to all of these problems. The prior administration before Xi was, if you looked at who they were all engineers, And so there's this notion, it's still, I wrote a while back about this Mao era, man must conquer nature mentality, but we still sort of have that. There's not, there's still fundamentally a mistrust of the people and an idea that, the scientists and engineers can, build their way out of the problem. And there's a tremendous power, for good or for bad, in the Chinese Academy of Sciences or Tsinghua University, the so-called MIT of China, where they're, coming up with these plans to do certain things with satellites and, put silver iodide into the air. So, yeah, we were saying before we started that recently, like just the last day or two, the Chinese Communist Party has criticized the Ministry of the Environment for not the Ministry of the Environment, for the Ministry of Energy for building too many coal-fired power plants. So there are, it's very important not to look at China as a monolith. There are different institutions that have different agendas. There are different institutions that want to partner more with incredible organizations like IPE and provide the data to help the transparency and put it in the hands of the people. And then there are other agencies that are more pressured towards economic growth. And then at the more local level, there are many corrupt officials who are very eager to, build housing projects and steal land from the peasants. And so, there's so many, China's such a complicated country. So I always try to not say China does this, China does that, because it's never quite accurate. Yeah.
Maybe let me rephrase this question before Marjan answers. Then, do you think that the central government is working more to incentivize investors to follow the green guidelines that they have for the Belt and Road Initiative? Do you think that this is happening?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we talked about China is really going green within China, and up to now, I think most of the efforts have been made inside China. Since we have created such a mess that we have to clean up. The past 40 years, a lot of not just manufacturing for ourselves, but as the factory of the world, so much have been dumped in our backyard. So we have to clean them up. And by cleaning them up, it's helpful to the region. It's helpful to the world, because this is simply such a big scale of emission. When it comes not just to carbon. But carbon is now a major part of that, but when it comes to China moving, outside China, this is very kind of a new phenomena. almost like a new challenge to our society, because before it's mostly the multinationals coming here to try to transfer pollution, from here and there into China, because taking advantage of our relaxed environmental enforcement and all of this. But now, suddenly China is moving beyond China. There are all these Chinese companies, investors try to move beyond China, and how to manage their operation. And sometimes, it's the government role, it's the government policy, but it's also about the capacity of all these companies, including some of the largest state-owned enterprises. They lack the real ability to try to move in a very different context, because within China, you got all this help from your government, local central government contact. But beyond China, then it's a whole different world. And some of them got burned so badly that they lost so much, outside China. So now even them started getting the real incentives to try to do something different, do it in a different way. So they're looking for help, from sometimes from NGO, including some of our partners like GEI, some Greenpeace, and they try to tap into their brain. And since we have the data, and sometimes they also, there's currently a discussion about really helping to pull the resource and build a database that wherever you're going, you can have people to be able to check about the environmental performance of all these companies within China, but also outside China, about their performance. Because investors within China, the banks, they want to understand what's going on, because these are serious economic risks, financial risks. So I think the central government is now trying to see them behave outside China. But now, at this moment, it's still, we're still at facing big challenges. And I do think that we can start from the data information access side.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something to that? Yeah. So I think, first of all, again, it's not a monolithic thing. So a lot of these activities along the Belt and Road and worldwide are not necessarily controlled by the central government. There are many different actors, and there are many efforts to educate Chinese investors and also to pressure Chinese investors. I've been involved with a number of these sorts of projects where Chinese lawyers are helping local indigenous people to sue Chinese companies who don't understand indigenous rights or things like that. So I think in the initial stages, the Chinese feeling was, oh, we came late and all the good investments are taken up and we have no choice but to partner with these unsavory governments and do these really marginal types of activities. And then they started to say, well, wait a minute. Yeah, if we don't use environmental and social screens, we're going to have strikes. These factories are going to get shut down. But there was a kind of like, the Chinese like to talk in terms of, they hurt our feelings, right? They hurt our feelings. We were just trying to do some good. We thought the government wanted this, and now there's strikes, And so there's a big learning curve. And, I think that on the one hand, as I mentioned earlier, in some parts of the world, Chinese investment is incredibly welcomed. And the young people are thinking, wow, the future is in China, and I'm learning Chinese, and I'm going to these Confucius institutes. But on the other hand, China's gotten a bad reputation also in many parts of the world. And so they're sort of struggling to try to make sense of that.
Yeah, I think sometimes we fall very easily on the trap of just seeing the country as a monolith, unfortunately. Thank you for reminding us of the complexity. Just going back to what Marjin was saying about, you mentioned the WWF. So I just had a question on So recently, the Communist Party has like enacted policies to curtail the the possible work that foreign NGOs could do in the country and the foreign funding that local NGOs could receive. How is this impacting your work, and how do you think it's impacting charities and environmental NGOs in general that are working in China?
Thank you. Yeah. In the early days when we got started, there was not much local source of funding, so the foreign NGOs and foreign foundations that brought into such a great contribution, to the environmental NGOs in China, and very, very helpful. And with this new foreign NGO legislation, it at the beginning, there was a big concern that that this may shut down the whole access to all this funding. I have to say, during the past 5 to 10 years, one of the progress made in China is that we finally started getting some solid local foundations. The SEE Foundation and Alibaba Foundation and Banker Foundation, IO Foundation. They started providing funding to help local NGOs and support local NGOs, including us. We got a lot of support from them. But still, in the meantime, we have maintained our collaboration with international NGOs, and this new law, make it have raised a new requirement that only those who got registered in China can provide funding, and so that make it that threshold is obviously, to some international NGOs, they wouldn't be able to cross that. So that will reduce some access to funding. Having said that, we managed to maintain the funding and collaboration with some of the close partners, including RBF, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and NRDC, and the Natural Resource Defense Council, and Energy Foundation, and who all got registered in China.
Yeah, if I could add just quickly, I think a simple way to think of it is that things have gotten much more difficult for international NGOs, but in some ways, local NGOs have a little bit more ability to fundraise within the country, and they don't have to register anymore with a mother-in-law. They can register directly, I think, with the Ministry of Civil Affairs, if I'm right, Majin. So, it's worse on some ways, better on some ways, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. For a period of time, yes, they can they don't need a mother-in-law, but that policy no longer. Yeah, they're quite there. So it's quickly evolving.
Just explain just quickly the mother-in-law, because I'm sure many of our audience will know.
Yeah, it means that you need to, as a NGO, you need to register with not just with the civil affairs agency, but also you need to have another agency which can, you can register with to be your guiding agency in some way, and that was called the mother-in-law, and in most of the time they won't really quite get involved very hands-on, but if you have trouble, then they will be held accountable. So that's why it is not quite easy for you to be able to find your mother-in-law, because they will be held accountable. Having said that, I have to say, in comparison with other NGOs, the on the environment side, we're rather lucky over the past 5 to 10 years, because this continued to be viewed as one of the most important missions in China. And so the red lines are still, here and there, but the space is actually, in some way growing. And when it comes to, as Dr. Shapiro said, some of the agencies, including the environmental agency, quite often have progressively minded officials, started from, including like Vice Minister Pan Yue and Minister Chan and others. It's quite so in some way, I would say we're quite lucky, and I hope that I often tell my colleagues, I'm quite sure that my former colleague who eventually become an assistant to Dr. Shapiro, Miss Gu Beibei, I'm sure I also told her that how lucky we are. We have to really try to value that and try to make sure that we can tap into the potential to help with the environment. Not just help with the environment, but try to help that with based on more like universal values, like transparency, the rights, the transparency and participation, and also rule of law and market-based solutions. I do hope that that we can tap into that, because there are far more consensus built on this single issue than any other social issues in China. So I think we must, try to tap into that.
And if I can add briefly, one of the findings of the book that I did with Ifeili, China Goes Green, the main finding is that a top-down approach doesn't succeed unless you have transparency, public participation, and buy-in. So, coercion with consent, not coercion without consent, right? So to go back in some ways to the Communist Party's roots of, the mass line and, the involvement of all of the people in these. If you don't explain it and if the people are not on board, it's not going to work in the long run, right?
Thank you both. I'll now move to the audience questions. We have quite a few. So the first one was referring to the sky rivers. So the audience member writes, does that cloud seeding have any effect beyond China's borders?
Okay, I haven't done an independent study of this. My understanding of it is based on some work that a journalist in the South China Morning Post did. But as with a lot of these geoengineering projects, sometimes they're not well understood. And there is an allegation that this would affect the water supply of India, because you're taking water from India and dumping it on the Tibetan plateau. So.
To continue on the geoengineering tone, someone else asked, do the experts have any thoughts on solar geoengineering? And I will add, is the central government, what is the stance on this issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a section in our book on it. I have a colleague, Simon Nicholson, who has a climate engineering sort of center, and I relied on him. China is actually a little more conservative than a lot of other countries on this. They're taking a precautionary approach, which is good, but they are doing a lot of research on solar geoengineering, and I think positioning themselves with all kinds of satellites and And even, you know, mining the far side of the moon, it's really fascinating because the world admires China so much for having been able to land on the far side of the moon. And they claim that this will allow them to get hold of this, I think it's called uranium-3, helium-3, sorry, maybe helium-3, I forget. But the stuff that will sort of solve the world's energy problems if we can mine it, and it's on the far side of the moon. But the security people are all like frantic because they say, oh my God, whatever China's doing on the far side of the moon, nobody's able to see it. And if they want to set up all these things that can knock down everybody else's satellites, we'll have no way of knowing. And, you know, so it's a very complex sort of issue. And a lot of the infrastructure, the space infrastructure that China is putting out there, again, in the name of environmental monitoring and all that, could be also used for military purposes. So depends on, you know, how much you trust China's motivations.
Mr. Ma, do you want to add something on this, or should I move to the next question?
Yeah, on the solar side and the wind side, you know, in general, they are truly renewable resource, renewable energy sources. But in the meantime, there are some implications, and in China, you know, there are also these concerns raised, you know, over the impact on the birds' migration, you know, by the wind power, and also the impact on the local biodiversity caused by the vast, you know, construction of the solar panel, you know, power generations. So at this moment, there are all this research going on to identify, you know, to try to figure out a more sustainable way to truly tap into this renewable resource.
Just to continue on green technology and renewable energy, someone is asking what green technologies is China patenting, and what's the future relationship between the WTO, China, and their proprietary green copyrights? Do you want to start, Professor Shapiro?
All right, WTO is not my area of expertise. I know that there were some lawsuits back and forth with, I think, the U.S. claiming that the subsidiary, the support for solar was somehow unfair labor practice, unfair trade practice, and that some of the U.S. companies couldn't compete. And I think some of these decisions came out in favor of the U.S. You know, I think we should all subsidize this kind of technology and not worry about, it's not about trade and making money, it's about reducing the world's climate footprints. So, yeah, I don't have much to say. I mean, China's always accused of stealing intellectual property, but it goes way back in Chinese history. They always say, you know, stealing a book is not stealing, right? That's a famous Chinese saying. Or imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So, you know, they're going to figure out, if they can figure out, you know, how to do it themselves, then they will. That's good. Yeah.
Do you want to add something, Mr. Mo?
Yeah, in some way, yeah, I hope that I hope only the solar panels and they can be used more within China. We have probably export too much of them, and the manufacturing process is a highly energy-intensive process, and now how to cut the emission of the production cycle is important, and in the meantime try to create policy so that you know, more of this can be applied within China. And on the intellectual property rights side, I think we haven't paid enough attention to that, and I think there's an increasing understanding within China, how important this is if we truly want to, encourage, incentivize innovation in China. So definitely should pay more respect to that, and should comply with the all the legal requirements of that, and now I think this is there's a homegrown interest in that. So I hope that we can eventually overcome this problem. Yeah.
It's just a question for myself actually, because you were saying how China is not using domestically as much solar PV as you would like. Um, uh, my understanding is that China is trying to diversify as much as possible their energy production, and they're developing huge capacities in nuclear energy. Are there domestic concerns about, waste and just the safety issues that nuclear power brings with it?
Yeah, nuclear. We used to have a far more ambitious planning on the on the nuclear energy, but then we have now Fukushima, and ever since then that mega planning have been somewhat diminished, and now the current policy is only to build them along the coastal regions in China and along the coast, basically, and with that, that have put some limitations on that, and but before, the plan is to build all these dozens of them along the Yangtze River, but now, I think it's it makes sense that we have to protect the water resources for hundreds of millions, and also in the meantime the safe disposal of the nuclear waste has been a challenge globally. Still we haven't really figured that out, and now I think we talked about the solar energy, and in China, some of the local companies who may started as some very, very local, very very small, but now they have grown so big and so powerful, and they truly have the innovative capacity to drive down the cost in a pretty amazing speed, and there's a still huge potential on that. I hope that the world can come together to really tap into this.
If I can add just on the disposal, both for nuclear and for PV, China's nuclear program started in the Southern Silk Road in the Gobi Desert, and a lot of the waste is going back there. And unfortunately, that becomes also a human rights problem, because these are precisely the Uyghurs and the other types of Muslims who are living in Xinjiang, in Central Asia. So they're in no position to resist. And then just for PV, just because we haven't mentioned it, the life cycle of these solar panels is not that long, 30 years, 40 years. And then we have a whole other waste disposal problem, right? So that has to be considered as well.
Thank you for those clarifications. We have one question on the youth. So is China respecting the voices of youth on the climate change issues, and how vocal are the younger generation in China regarding these issues?
Which issue? The issue of
change.
Sorry?
Climate change.
The young people, how did young people view climate change? Yeah. there's a kind of a survey upon survey that shows a very high recognition to the climate change issue in China. In some way, it makes sense because the Chinese media probably have more freedom to report on this issue than on many other issues. So they give, in some way, inappropriate, disproportional attention on this issue in comparison with the U.S. media, I think. So primetime news, you often heard about, read about this, heard about this, all this fire, in wildfire in Australia, in the western coast of the U.S., and also, the extreme weather like rainstorm in China, often attributed to this issue. So I think in China there's a very high recognition. We recently have done a survey along with the Chinese Academy of Environmental Planning, and together we have found again that people do care about this issue, and they want China to peak sooner. They want their cities to peak sooner, than better 2025. The reason is that they link that to cleaner air. They link that to the higher quality of life, and so that's very sounds like solid. But on the other hand, whether they have fully translate all of this into action, I put a big question mark on that, because many of them behave like they are still pursuing an American dream. They want big house, they want big cars, even the e-vehicles. They want, one model after another. They become bigger and bigger, and I just don't know whether this is going to be the most climate friendly way of living.
Yeah, I have something to say about this too. I have so many students who've come to me and said, I'm going to write my term paper on the climate movement, the youth climate movement in China. And I always, well, actually you're not, because, with the air pollution and the water pollution and the food safety issues so intense, people are very focused on these public health aspects or even biodiversity. But climate, I would say in some ways the government is farther ahead in their understanding of the urgency of this issue than your ordinary Chinese person. And as Ma Jun said, they associate a double win, right? If we deal with ground level ozone, we'll also probably deal with climate change. But there's one young Chinese woman who's kind of, I think she's sort of learned from Greta Thunberg, and she's trying to raise awareness. But I think that that's very much under, under the influence of the publicity of what's going on overseas, rather than some kind of homegrown urgency about climate change.
I think that's something that we see in other countries as well. I'm from Morocco, and people are, while they are aware of water scarcity issues and pollution, not everyone is going to think about like the earth system and climate change. So I think it's a very common issue outside of the West. There's another question on carbon trading. So how big is carbon trading in China, and what do the speakers think about its prospects?
Yeah, cap and trade is a market based solution. It started from the U.S. and flourished in in Europe. I think now EU is having the most viable cap and trade market on the carbon side, and literally China, from I'm not sure whether it's from today or yesterday. Anyway, China initiated the cap and trade market, the national market, after 7 long years of trial in different regions. This got delayed, I think it just demonstrates how gloomy the climate campaign has become, because finally over the past long 4 years of this inaction, because the Trump administration had pulled out of withdraw from the Paris Agreement, taking away whatever international pressure it used to have here. So I think this was very, very unhelpful, and so China hasn't really initiated that. But now, with the pledge and the national market finally get going, and although even with just one industry, the coal power industry being included in this, more than 2,000 coal power plants, this already become the world's largest carbon trading market. I'm most happy to see that the new ruling finally says that those companies need to disclose their emission data to the public. We have been pursuing for this for over 5 years. Every year trying to set motion through the Congress meeting, or just try to make policy advocacy on this, because without disclosure, without measuring and disclosure, then you can't have a real market, that can result in emission reduction. So I do think that there's hope here and now, but there's still so much work to be done to make sure that we don't just have treat. It can really lead to real reduction. There are a lot of good experience from EU, but also very hard lessons that we must learn from them.
Yeah, there's a lot of risks as we go towards 2060 and carbon neutrality. It's likely that cap and trade mechanisms are going to be more and more widespread in China. But the question then becomes, who decides how to allocate the credits, right? And so let's say you have a sporting event that has, X amount of pollution credits to dispense, who decides, and so then that becomes yet another tool that the government can use to basically prop up and reward industries or people or institutions that they like, and punish those that they don't like, right? So there's a lot of risks, I think, involved.
Yeah. That's why, we also very much think that the other market-based solutions like green finance and green supply chain is very, very important. Because, just like green supply chain, we talked about the young people. They may not know, day in, day out, they may not behave like some of the more progressively minded in the US or in Europe. They still don't know how to really go climate friendly. But those big brands can help them. They can help to drive down their per unit carbon intensity, and eventually help with all the millions of young people to go green. And I hope that. So that's why we call our program the Green Choice Initiative, because we do believe that nobody can dominate the decision of the individuals, of the others, but we can let them know what will be the consequences if they cannot make a greener choices.
Thank you so much. Now that we come to the end of our event, if both of you want to give ending comments, please go ahead. We'll start with Professor Shapiro.
Oh, I'm not ready. Anyway, this has been a great discussion. I feel like Oxford is in my life these days, Oxford University Press. I'm going to mentor some Oxford students, so, from Washington, D.C. to Oxford, Teleporting here to talk about China's environmental future has been really great. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's I also, I really miss Oxford, and Oxford was is quite familiar, but not the students from Oxford, because every vacation, one every year, during the vacation, we are one of the SCO awardees. Hundreds of us will will gather there, to have our annual meeting there. I was, we became the first Chinese NGO to receive this this award from the SCO Foundation on social entrepreneurship. So I truly, enjoy the great university, and today, finally, I have the chance to to have some communications with the and discussions with the Oxford students, and I'm so pleased and so honored.
It was our privilege to have you both. I'm sure all the audience members learned a lot, and will continue their journey in learning and growing as individuals after this. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to have another event next week on Thursday on the role of civil disobedience in climate movement. We'll be joined by Professor Patrick Bond from the University of Western Cape, the School of Government, and Professor James Jasper, Professor of Sociology in the US that specializes in culture and politics. So please join us then, and now I will